Hi watch friends, the Watch Talk crew is back and today we're spotlighting the trending watches of 2023. If you haven't done so already, don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can stay up to date on all of our latest watch collecting content. Ripley, nice to see you.
Likewise.
Justin, as always, love having you. Today we are highlighting a few of the hottest watches of the year. We've got some great options, but before we do this, I definitely want to know what you guys are wearing. So, Ripley, what's on your wrist?
Breitling Navitimer BO1 chronograph, 43 mil with the ice blue dial. Think it is, I like the Navitimer, got small wrists. This actually wears surprisingly compact for 43 mil, and that's not something I frequently say.
Well, it looks great on your wrist.
I'm surprised to see that on your wrist. Out of all the watches that have been too big for your wrist, that's saying something to be able to sport that.
I needed to do some long division and fuel calculation on my drive down, so this was the tool for it.
It's a great one.
The ice blue is great too.
How about yourself?
I am wearing a nice Cartier Santos.
Ooh,
34 millimeters, so a little bit bigger on my wrist too for me, but kind of a fun one.
Nice.
What about you?
I'm going classic as well. Rolex Explorer 2, a white dial. Like I said, classic.
Love it. All right, so as we mentioned today, we are kicking off, I guess, kind of the fresh start of 2023 with a few watches that we are, I don't want to say predicting, but I will, that we are predicting will definitely like have a moment. So we're weaving in some trends in and out of, I guess, why we've chosen these watches too. So definitely pay attention, take some notes. You will definitely want to see what we're talking about. So you guys ready to kick this off?
Yeah, let's get into it.
All right, so we've got a small vintage Rolex cocktail here. It is 22 millimeters. Why are we talking about something that's 22 millimeters?
I think smaller watches are kind of making a comeback, coming back in style. I mean,
for both sides of the coin, right?
Yeah,
Men and women?
yeah. Just in general. I mean, we frequently talk about it within the context of like integrated bracelets, where it's like you get a little smaller case size, you get more of the bracelet, and then from a mechanical perspective, it's not necessarily remarkable to put a watch movement in a very large case, but when you get a mechanical or an automatic movement in something the size of a button, that's more impressive. Yeah. So I think they're small watches. They're kind of underappreciated. For a while, it was like everything over 40. Now we're seeing a lot more in that kind of mid-size sort of realm, and you're seeing a lot of celebrities also rocking smaller watches. So I think it's kind of perfectly in line.
I definitely see a lot more smaller watches, and it's nice. I like it. I mean, the pendulum swings, right? Like you said, everything went from huge. 40 was the small size. It was 42, 44, 47. What are just giant watches everywhere. And we've kind of seen a correction, and I like that. I like the 38 millimeter sport watches. To me, that's such a great size because it's not too big for someone with small wrists. It's not too small for someone with big wrists. It's just, it's a little on the smaller side, but to me, it's right in that sweet spot. So yeah, I've definitely been noticing a trend of smaller watches. Also, can I mention cocktails?
Yes, please.
This is a thing that we've been seeing a lot of, right? Cocktails are definitely having a moment.
I have always enjoyed cocktail. It's kind of that grandma chic vibe that everybody is picking up on, at least from a trend perspective. And we've seen this over the years. Cocktail watches were definitely lower on the like desirability pool. And they were easy to pick up at a relatively, affordable price. They're climbing steadily, and the availability has definitely gone down. We're not seeing them as much because people aren't willing to part with them.
Right.
So I guess this is kind of that unique twist where not only smaller sizes, but very, very vintage.
Yeah, like tiny. I mean, we're getting really small on some of these cocktails.
This is early 50s.
So different than anything, speaking Rolex here, that Rolex produces. Oyster cases are now pretty much everything that they produce.
Right.
You look at a cocktail watch, it's not a Rolex on paper.
Sure.
In the same way that we're like, why is the Cellini like such a great value proposition? It's because you can find things that don't look like a Rolex, yet it's a solid gold Rolex for the price of a steel sports watch. And the cocktail is that to the nth degree.
Right.
It's this elegant little bracelet, but it's not. It's a watch. Oh, what kind of watch? It's a Rolex. So yeah, it makes perfect sense.
And that was what I think kind of held them back before. A lot of people, they wanted a Rolex, and they're like, it's not really what I think of when I think of wanting a Rolex, right? It's different. It's not like you said, you want the oyster case, you want whatever. And so prices have always been really reasonable on cocktails. I remember, not that long ago, it was like they were in the few hundreds of dollars. And I think that's kind of people have started seeing the value there. And also, there's really interesting styles. There's a million different ones. Like there's some crazy stuff that is awesome, and I think people are starting to appreciate that,
Yeah.
and we see prices going up. But I mean, even though prices have been going up and they're getting more attention, they're still relatively inexpensive, and I think a great value proposition.
Yeah. Yep, I agree. When you want to talk about unique cocktail watches,
Yeah.
are definitely that category to jump to. You are rarely going to see the same watch, at least on our site from a cocktail perspective. I have never seen a watch like this ever before, and that's just the beauty of those. They were making such a variety at that time frame that there's so much to offer.
Great way to get into a Rolex.
Well, yeah, I feel like you could grab 10 cocktail watches. You'll probably see at least 3 or 4 that you haven't quite seen that variation before. This, like with the little star markers and this almost looks like it should be a much bigger watch, but just like micro down to like 22 millimeters.
Field-looking style, like shrunk down into this tiny little elegant cocktail watch. I love it.
The engine turn bezel on that is definitely one of my favorites.
Yeah.
But cool, I think the other side of it too is the dress watch vibe. Sport watches, you mentioned it, definitely were kind of the thing for years at a time. And I think we're really noticing that desirable dress watch back in a collection where, you're not wearing it every single day. It's really living on your wrist as that special, special outing watch, whatever it may be. And there's a time and a place for it. So I don't know. It'll be fun to sort of see where these go this year.
Yeah, I think especially in the luxury segment, because, if you're spending thousands, somewhere north of 1,000 to sky's the limit on a watch, it's going to be something you're going to reasonably treat better. And I think there's sort of, unless someone's made of money, kind of a ceiling where they will spend for a sports watch. You get a solid gold sub, you're not really wearing it like a sports watch. Maybe you'll go diving with it, but that's not what you're putting on when you're going to go like redo the bathroom sink or something like that.
Right.
It's not the carefree tool because it costs 30, 40, 50 grand. But if you spend a lot on a dress watch and it's that nice piece you wear when you put on a suit or go to dinner, have like a black tie obligation, you can wear $10 million on your wrist, and that seems to be a lot more responsible than putting $10 million on your wrist to go spend a day at the beach, where it might get sand and rocks and all of that. So I think as a lot of people, they get the sports watches they want. They're growing their collection. They now are going to be spending maybe $10,000, $15,000 on a watch. They probably already have some sports watches, or if they're looking for that hole in their collection, they might get something more budget friendly. They might pick up an Oris. And then what are you going to spend the 10, 15 grand on? Get like a solid gold dress watch, something a bit more resplendent.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the dress watches are kind of having a moment, which I really like. I felt like we've been so into sport watches recently that dress watches have just been overlooked. I mean, look, there's no doubt about it. Sport watches are cool, right? That's the thing. Vintage, it's mostly about the sport watches. It's just really where all the focus has been. And dress watches have been kind of played a backseat to that, and now they're starting to come to the front. It's a little bit different. We talk about things shifting back and forth, and now that's the different thing that you don't really see every day. We see sport watches all the time. And I think it's really nice to see some of those offerings from the dress watches that's not what you see every day, not another GMT, not another Daytona, which are great. But again, we probably see 10 times as many chronographs and GMTs as I do a nice, dress watch, even just like a time-only, really slick, nice.
Yeah, and then on top of that, there's fewer design constraints. So if you're making a dive watch, it has to hit ISO 6425. It also has to be water resistant to this and hit these metrics for its performance. There's no ISO definition of what needs to be a dress watch, and so with that open-ended design where if it only needs to be mildly water resistant, almost anything is possible. You can get some really, really interesting designs, aesthetics, physical experiences on the wrist that simply wouldn't be possible if you had to make something that's supposed to be legible, highly water resistant, shock resistant, and all of that. And so I think from a design perspective, I think a lot of the watch companies are going to want to embrace it because it does open up a lot more of what they can do.
Yeah, I'm all for it. I love to see great looking dress watches. I love seeing all the amazing dials that we see from Grand Seiko and Omega. And, we just see these really, just really well put together dress watches that I feel are kind of new and refreshing. And I'm all for it.
I would say fun. Fun with sizes, fun with dress watches.
Right.
Definitely take a look at these as the weeks go by. You will notice that what we're saying happens to be true. So let's move on. You guys ready for our next one?
Yes.
I'm excited for this. So this is really kind of that sleeper watch that used to maybe, again, kind of live in that undesirable range, that now is swinging over to the other side. So we have this Domino's Air King. Definitely not the most, coveted watch back in the day. Oh, baby, is it hard to find these days?
So this is one where it's kind of like the things that really weren't that desirable, like the kind of dogs of yesteryear, are now the things that are kind of coming into the light and becoming desirable. This is probably the biggest example of it. We've seen it before with remember the Kermit and the Hulk? No one wanted those. They were like a weird green Submariner. No, and then tables have kind of turned and they're desirable. And I'm starting to see that with a lot more other watches, kind of those weird dialed Air Kings, and some of the kind of weird one-off things that probably were people see and they think like, oh, what were they thinking here? And they weren't too expensive. Now have started to gain a following. This is a perfect example. I remember when people would get these Domino's watches and they would sell them to us here. It was a huge price hit. It's like it was automatically worth less because it had that Domino's on the dial, because let's be honest, at the time no one wanted a Domino's logo on the dial of your Rolex. Now people are really into it. It's kind of nostalgic and it's kind of campy, and I think it's really cool. Like with your theme, it's very fun.
It is
and
fun.
It's coming back around, and I'm happy to see it.
And the variations that were offered, I guess, throughout this sort of offering, if you will, so cool.
Yeah.
Well, and it's kind of that irreverent logo that's very familiar that you don't expect to see under the Rolex coronet, the pizza box, but it's also something they don't do anymore. So there is still the Domino's Awards watch, but you're not going to get a Domino's dial. It's a signet link stamped into the bracelet. So on the collector's side, there's a wide range of variation. It's not something you can get anymore. A fleeting number of examples available. And so it has all the legs for the collectability side, but I think once you have a few more restrained formal watches, getting that fun, that, watch collecting should be fun. And I think having, the budget-friendly delivery pizza thing, I think that kind of speaks to a lot of people on Rolex, which is, blue chip luxury manufacturer.
Right.
The first and last name when it comes to mainstream, well-known, uber-famous, luxury watches. And Domino's is the same, but in the total opposite side when it comes to the most infinitely available, call them any time of night, they will deliver, you know what I mean? It's the total opposite of Rolex. So I think it kind of represents a really interesting aspect, in addition to being that overlooked thing where you got some people saying, I picked it up for a song, because I got it because it was cheaper than the other one.
Yes, exactly.
Now that's not the case whatsoever.
Yeah, and it kind of ties in, like we talked about the cocktails. It's very similar, where it was like they were overlooked in the past because they weren't as desirable for whatever reason, and now they're starting to gain that appreciation, which I love. So our last watch out here is a vintage.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that one.
Love this gold date. This one is from 66, I think, bracelet, 67 case. Cool watch. Definitely hits a nice price point for a gold Rolex. Why are we predicting this to kind of have a moment this year?
So this is kind of like what we've been talking about all day. This is a great example of dress watch. We talk about vintage. Vintage has been, very sport heavy. Everyone loves the subs and Daytonas and everything. And the vintage dress watches have kind of been overlooked. And this is a great example of it. This watch right now on the site is, give or take $10,000 for a solid gold vintage watch, vintage Rolex watch. So I think it's really great that they're starting to get some attention, and all that hype and attention from the vintage sport watches that have been in the spotlight is now carrying over to some of the dress watches, and so many amazing watches that really haven't been paid attention to are starting to make their way to the front.
Yeah, I think, as interest in anything grows, more attention on the vintage market is inevitable. Like, look at cars or anything. There's something inherently special when you can't they're not making anymore. It's something that existed at a certain point in time, and if you didn't get one then,
now finite.
You have to get one now. But, let's be real, this isn't a world where you can just go buy whatever Rolex is selling. And so once you're going to be looking on the pre-owned market, Why do you have to just get the current model? You might prefer the older model. You might have nostalgic reasons for preferring the older model. It might have been the watch you saw on your grandfather's wrist, your father's wrist, the neighbor who just you looked up to and was the successful cool guy. You know what I mean? So I think there's going to be more attention on the vintage market. Again, as we're talking about smaller case sizes as well, people looking for more funky designs, a bit more playful stuff, all of that points to vintage. And although vintage Rolex is also where the top end of price point happens, it's also some of the most affordable.
Yeah.
So let's be real, you're not getting a current production modern Rolex watch for under $5,000, period. The cheapest one would be like maybe an Oyster Perpetual or a Datejust. That's not $5,000. The cheapest watch is actually a vintage Rolex. And so for the people looking to get their feet wet with the brand, get a Rolex, it's increasingly becoming an attractive value proposition, not necessarily the $50,000 ones for the entry-level purchase, but, you know, if you want to get like a 5500 Air King, $3,000-$4,000, and
awesome.
Yeah, I own one, love it, and it's a fantastic watch, but also something that, you know, wouldn't necessarily be the obvious purchase if you could go to the store and get the brand new version for $6K.
Sure. Yeah, great value. And like I said, I feel like that price is going to be moving up. You know, they're starting to get more attention. They're starting to get more love. And, you know, that's how it goes. Prices follow. So I think right now the vintage dress watches are a really good move.
Yeah, they're cool.
Yeah.
They're definitely
Accessible.
wearable.
Yeah.
Available. I mean, those are kind of the things that I look for, especially when like watch shopping. So it'll be very interesting to kind of see where vintage goes this year. You know, we see a lot of vintage, I guess, just working at Bob's. It's now definitely a big part of our overall inventory offering, and these are readily available. I mean, this is definitely not the only watch on the site, but when you break it all down, you know, it's not that tier 1 sport watch, you know, it's tier 2, tier 3, but at the end of the day, you're walking away with at least in this case, a gold Rolex watch for definitely an affordable price.
Yeah.
What more do you want?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so as we've talked about some of the trends we're noticing for the year, we're curious, what do you guys think will take off in 2023? Be sure to let us know in the comments. We always love hearing what your guys' opinions may be. Have we hit the nail on the head with some of these? Are you against some of our things? Definitely let it be known. You've got a chance in the comments, and we would appreciate any feedback you guys have. So it's a fun one. We made predictions. Now we're, you know, kind of leaning into what's going to be hot this year.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking the time to kind of talk some watches. So until next time, you guys, be well.